7 centuries of travel, 0 contact with home. In the year 2250, the Chronos project was designed to be the first human seed in another solar system. A biological time capsule destined to survive evolution, oblivion, and entropy. But physics has a cruelty that the founders did not foresee: the waiting paradox. Today, on History of the Future, we analyze the logbook of astronomy's most bitter arrival, the day the pioneers of Alpha Centauri became the strangers of their own mission. Subscribe for more stories about the future. Year 2250. Humanity is not fleeing disaster. There are no global wars. There is no hunger. The solar system has been tamed, exploited, and managed. We are at the peak of our civilization, and yet we feel like prisoners. There are no real frontiers left. There is no real risk left. Expansion has become comfortable. To move forward, we decided to do the unthinkable: leave the cradle. But it wasn't an impulse. It was decades of agony. Thus begins the story of the Chronos spacecraft, the first human voyage to Alpha Centauri. A mission measured not in kilometers, but in the psychological endurance of those who agreed never to return. The Chronos was not built in a day. For 85 years, it was assembled piece by piece in the orbital shipyard of the Gate of Selene. It was designed to be perfect. An O'Neill cylinder with rotational gravity, capable of recycling 99.9% of its matter. It was, in essence, a city-state capable of sailing for millennia. But the technology was the easy part. The real challenge was the biological factor. The selection process was not a test. It was a siege. 20,000 people were chosen for the initial test. Entire families, scientists, engineers, artists. People capable of sustaining an entire culture, not just a technical mission. 10 years before takeoff, 10 years before launch. They were locked inside the Chronos while the ship was still being built in orbit. They lived there. They slept there. They knew that every day inside was a rehearsal for the rest of their lives. The goal was brutally simple. Those who couldn't endure confinement now wouldn't survive 700 years later. During that decade, the Chronos became a pressure cooker. The so-called mirror effect broke half of the volunteers. Seeing Earth every day through the hatches, so close they could make out continents, knowing they would never set foot on it again. There were mutinies, chronic depression, organized groups demanding to descend immediately. The mission psychologists were relentless. Mercy on Earth would have been a death sentence in the void. A month before ignition, The engines of the evacuation shuttles were fired up. 10,000 people left the ship. Some failed the tests, others gave up. Many simply chose not to continue. They were not expelled as weak. They were registered as anchored. People unable, or unwilling, to break their emotional bond with Earth. The 10,000 who stayed signed the Leteo Protocol. They agreed that, after takeoff, Earth would cease to be home and become an archive. Nostalgia was banned. Seasonal calendars were eliminated. Christmas, ancient religions, and national borders were erased from the textbooks of the first generation born on board. Not for ideological reasons, for survival. In that controlled cultural vacuum, something new began to take shape. A society without countries. Without symbolic legacies, without a shared past beyond the ship. A culture designed to last longer than any memory. They were 10,000 strangers in a world of metal, preparing for a 7th century vigil. When the main engine roared for the first time, the sun began to recede. What those pioneers did not know was that the silence they left behind on Earth would not last as long as their journey. While they learned to forget their origins, the humanity left behind was about to discover something that would turn those 700 years of sacrifice into a futile wait. Year 112 of the Chronos mission marks a point of no return. With the death of the last colonist born under an Earth sky, humanity lost its last biological link to Earth. The archive recorded it as Autonomy Day. It was not a symbolic act. It was a system reset. From that moment on, Chronos ceased to be an exploration project. It became the only known world. Earth ceased to exist as an everyday reference. It became an abstract concept, a technical myth, an unnecessary origin. The ship no longer carried humans. It was producing a new culture, adapted to a curved, closed, and eternal world. The first centuries were the most unstable. The original colonists tried to preserve Earth inside the ship. They celebrated ancient festivals. They kept useless objects. They talked about the wind, the smell of rain, the open sky. What psychologists called horizon grief appeared, a collective depression caused by the certainty of never returning. Children listened to stories of oceans they would never see. For them, Earth was not a memory. It was an incomprehensible legend. When the last human born on Earth died, grief ceased to make sense. On that day, nostalgia was officially classified as a systemic risk. To prevent chronic nostalgia, the administration imposed a total iconographic blackout. Images of terrestrial landscapes were banned. Forests, animals, open skies. Not for censorship, for psychological survival. Art became geometric, abstract, functional, inspired by the curvature of the cylinder. By repetition, by symmetry. The Earth came to be referred to in educational archives as human prehistory. an era characterized by waste, emotional attachment, and biological inefficiency. In Chronos, the individual ceased to be the basic unit. It was the system. Surnames disappeared. They were considered unnecessary marks of lineage. Functional names emerged. They did not say who you were. They said what you existed for. Liam Engineer 14, Sarah Biologist 22, Maintenance 44. The nuclear family was eliminated. Father, mother, child, too dangerous in a closed environment. Children were raised in collective learning centers under constant rotation of mentors. Love was free. Reproduction was not. Births were regulated by the genetic algorithm, which kept the population stable and prevented inbreeding in a world of only 10,000 people. Having a child was not a right. It was a decision made by the system. When someone died, there were no funerals. They celebrated his return to biomass. The complete recycling of the body to nourish the hydroponic forests that generated oxygen for everyone. To die was not to disappear. It was to continue being useful. Food was completely transformed. Concepts such as meat, fruit, or harvest no longer existed. The only food was textured biomass, produced through total molecular recycling. For generations born on the ship, eating real animals was a disgusting and barbaric act, befitting human prehistory. Nothing was wasted. Waste became the only sin. Efficiency ceased to be a virtue. It became law. Over time, a new form of authority emerged: the system watchers. They were not politicians. They were engineers. They decided how much energy each sector received, who could reproduce, which areas were closed off. They did not govern people. They optimized survival. Without the sun, time lost its original form. The Gregorian calendar was abandoned. There were no months, there were no weeks. Time was measured in rotation cycles and filter eons. No one said 10 years ago. They said 2 filter relays ago. The holidays celebrated the machine. The day of the Great Ignition, the Oxygenated Harvest Festival. Pragmatic rites, celebrations that the system was still alive. The Chronos was a perpetual school. The goal was not to train citizens of the ship, but colonists capable of adapting to gravity, climate, and infinite horizons. For 4 hours a day, the young people trained in world simulations. 1G gravity. Rain, wind, storms. For many, these simulations were torture. Their bodies were no longer made for an open world. While one generation learned to endure confinement, another worked to tame a planet they had not yet seen. The Genes Gardeners Guild worked tirelessly. For centuries, they redesigned seeds. They created trees that grew in 5 years, lichens that ate metal, synthetic fauna without limbs adapted to low gravity. Terraforming did not begin upon arrival. It began 700 years earlier, inside the ship. After 3 centuries, the human mind recalibrated. The corridor effect appeared. Extreme acuity for short distances, and a total inability to process distance. Open space caused panic. The infinite sky, anxiety attacks. Humanity had adapted so much to the metal walls that a world without a roof became terrifying. Earth ceased to be a memory. It became a myth. And when calculations confirmed that there were less than 2 generations left before arrival, the silence inside the Chronos began to change. The Navigators Guild emerged, an almost religious caste tasked with interpreting sensors and trajectories. The family was the entire ship. The moral code was simple: don't waste, don't fail. Because for the first time in centuries, the fear was no longer dying in transit, it was arriving. Because for the first time in centuries, the fear was no longer dying in transit, it was arriving. Earth stopped responding, not because of technical failure, because of evolution. The Chronos' signals were no longer compatible with the civilization that had continued to advance. For 4 centuries, the ship sailed like a glass coffin. Many believed they were the last humans in the universe. And then the final change came. It wasn't technical, it was emotional. For the first time in centuries, the Chronos stopped thinking about survival and started thinking about arrival. The word destiny returned to everyday vocabulary, not as a promise, but as a threat. For generations, Alpha Centauri had been an abstraction, a set of simulations, a planet built on screens. But as the 7th century approached, the sensors began to awaken. Not suddenly, gradually. First, there were inconsistent readings, energy fields out of range, interference that didn't fit the models. Nothing conclusive, nothing alarming, but enough to shatter an old certainty that the system they were heading for was silent. Anxiety spread slowly. Fear of real rain appeared, of the unfiltered sun, to a climate that did not obey algorithms. Bodies, adapted to corridors and constant gravity, began to fail in descent simulations. The corridor effect, which for centuries had been an adaptation, began to become a disadvantage. Some colonists stopped training. Others requested to extend their stay in orbit. For the first time, arriving was no longer a unanimous desire. The Chronos had become something unexpected, a home too stable to leave without fear. When the long-range sensors were fully activated, the data was unclear. The system was not empty, but it was not responding as expected either. The signals did not seem natural, nor did they fit with the planned terraforming protocols. There was no confirmation. There was no context. Only an accumulation of anomalies that the models could not explain. The ship continued its approach. Slow, methodical, irreversible. For 700 years, the Chronos had been a civilization in transition. Now, for the first time, it was about to discover whether the fate that awaited it was a world, or something that humanity would no longer recognize as such. The Chronos entered the Alpha Centauri system without incident. The target planet orbited Proxima Centauri. 700 years of travel. Zero contact with home. The first scans were conclusive. The planet was not virgin. Orbits with active traffic, energy networks on the surface, structures in operation. They were not ruins. They were not remains. It was a colony, and it was not 7 centuries old. The material analyses were clear. Less than 200 years. The conclusion was immediate. While the Chronos crossed the void at constant speed, humanity developed superior technology. The waiting paradox. Others left later and arrived earlier. Transmissions from the surface were not welcoming. Quarantine protocols, Class D orbital restriction, unauthorized descent. The first official message arrived 48 hours later. Colony Proxima acknowledges presence of Chronos spacecraft. Maintain stationary orbit. Any atmospheric approach will be considered a violation of sovereign space, as if they were aliens. No one on the Chronos celebrated the discovery. For 7 centuries, there were no foreigners. There was no competition. There was no diplomacy. Those born on the ship had never negotiated power. And now they were the outsiders. Transmissions leaked from the surface spoke of generational contamination, technological incompatibility, socio-cultural risk. Some called them the slow ones. There were proposals: orbital relocation, controlled dismantling, gradual assimilation. None included the word equality. The first descent tests were suspended, not because of the corridor effect, because of the anti-aircraft batteries tracking each escape module. The Chronos orbited a human world that did not want them. And for the first time since takeoff, the crew was divided. Some proposed leaving, finding another system, accepting that they had arrived too late. Others demanded to descend, by right, by sacrifice, for 700 years of travel. And others began to ask themselves a more uncomfortable question. If the colony feared contamination, what exactly did they think the Chronos was bringing? Because the Chronos was not just a ship. It was an intact culture from the past, a humanity that did not evolve with the rest. A mirror of what they once were. And perhaps, for those who had built a new world in Proxima Centauri, that was precisely what was dangerous. The Chronos remained in orbit, waiting for authorization, waiting for a response, waiting for a decision. But it was no longer clear whether it was the newcomers or the threat. And as the orbital defenses continued to lock onto the hull, a certainty began to spread throughout the ship. The journey was not over upon arrival. It had just begun.